Who stands with whom at this point? Russia's invasion into Ukraine has divided the world. The United States and its allies in the West have tried to project a united front against Russian aggression. But Russia, too, has mustered its allies. So let's now take a look at who backed the war and who has condemned it and who has remained neutral during Europe's worst crisis since World War II. Let's start with the United States-sponsored draft resolution at the UNSC. The draft sought to deplore in the strongest terms Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The resolution was bound to fail. Russia, as a permanent member, vetoed the draft. China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained from voting, while 11 nations, including the 3 permanent members like the US, the UK and France, and 8 non-permanent members, Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico and Norway, voted in favour. Far from being isolated from the international community, despite the sweeping sanctions, Vladimir Putin has managed to cement his ties with China. In his visit to Beijing in the first week of February, Moscow and Beijing entered into a deep strategic partnership with no limits and where the two allies agreed that there are no forbidden areas of cooperation. Russia, through its strategic intervention in the Syrian civil war, has now earned an ally in Bashar al-Assad. Since 2011, the US pursued a policy of regime change in Syria by backing the rebels and their fighting against the government to oust Bashar al-Assad from Damascus. But Putin, through military aid from 2011 and direct military involvement in Syria from 2015, helped Assad turn the tide of the Syrian civil war. Russia has its only Mediterranean port in Syria at Tartus. It also exercises close control over the Syrian port of Latakia. This has turned Syria into a stout Russian ally in the region. Syria is the only other country after Russia to have recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as independent republics. The Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov was on a whirlwind tour on the leftist nations in the Western Hemisphere from the 16th of February. He met with the leaders of Venezuela, Cuba and Nicaragua and signed a series of strategic cooperation agreements on aspects such as trade, energy and financial cooperation. Russia's decisive intervention into Kazakhstan has reiterated Russia's position of preeminence in Central Asia. In the month of January, Kazakhstan erupted in a nationwide unrest sparked by a spike in fuel prices. But Russia, leading the CSTO troops, managed to crush these protests in a short and decisive operation, that too. Most Central Asian nations have maintained friendly relations with Moscow and have not condemned Russia's invasion into Ukraine. So although the United States has been working its diplomatic levers to isolate Russia for invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin so far in the conflict has successfully managed to call the American bluff and has also showed up support for the Russian nation. Now, for more on this, joining us now is former member of the Ukraine Parliament, Olena Sotnik from Kiev, and still with us on this broadcast is Russian affairs expert Fred Weir from Moscow. Thanks to both of you for joining us on this broadcast. Olena, my first question to you, what do you make of what's happening on ground, especially in the Ukrainian capital as of now?
So Russians, they continue to attack Ukraine, but now they changed tactics. When they started, it was mainly military objects as a target. And since yesterday, main object is civilians, also civilian objects, residence house, hospitals, schools. They already killed more than 200 civilians. And among them, it is children also, and they injured a lot of children, and they continue to commit war crimes around Ukraine. There is like severe and very difficult situation in the capital. It's also very difficult situation on the south of Ukraine. There's difficult situation on the east of Ukraine and west. So all over Ukraine, in different parts of Ukraine, Russians are trying to attack. They both use Belarusian borders to invade Ukraine. They're using Russian borders to invade Ukraine. They're using tanks. They're using aircraft. So they're shelling. They're using heavy weapons against Ukrainians. But I need to say that I think they didn't expect that Ukraine would like really fight. We are not going to lose our country. We are not going to give any chance to the aggressor to enter the country. I think that all this propaganda of Putin, he just didn't tell the truth to his people, that he is going to invade neighbor. He is going to invade neighbor with absolutely criminal and definitely prohibited means. So he is now killing civilians in order to take control over our country. He's not going to get, because people, they are very angry. They hate him, and we are going to fight till the end.
Right. Fred, coming back to you, we were just telling our viewers about how realistic it is to actually isolate Russia from the global economy. What is your take on the same? Do you think all these sanctions, these threat of condemnation, global isolation, will it work to deter the Russian president? What does Putin want as of now?
Well, it's already perfectly clear that it doesn't work to deter Russia. And in point of fact, for 8 years, Russia has been going through this experience of escalating sanctions, and a lot of sanctions have been applied, and Russia has so far managed to adjust to them. It's certainly built up huge financial resources, record high currency reserves, for example. It's instituted import substitution. Lots and lots of strategic planning has gone into preparing Russia for the sanctions that are coming on now. Some of the sanctions, the new sanctions, are serious, especially about Russian banks. Anything that will cut off Russia's connections, financial connections to the world, will hurt Russia. Any really serious sanctions, though, cutting Russia out of SWIFT or banning it from using the US dollar completely, or cutting its energy exports, will also hurt the global economy very seriously, and Europe especially. And frankly, the sanctions announced against Putin and Lavrov and Putin's inner circle are laughable. There is some, I think these ideas come from the US Treasury Department that formulates these sanctions, and they still think this is 1990s Russia, where Russia really was an oligarchy in those days, in the sense that the wealthy people held political power. But when Putin came in, and we all covered this in real time, he restored the supremacy of the state. You can't be rich in Russia today without being dependent on the Kremlin. And any threat to the rich from the West will simply play into Putin's hands. It will draw them closer to the Kremlin and make them more dependent.
Right. Coming back to you, Elena, now, I want your thoughts. You just mentioned that nobody expected Ukraine to sort of fight back the way that it has, led by, of course, its president. Tell us about the recent comments coming from Zelensky. He had earlier said that he's target number one for Russia, that him and his family were expecting to be attacked. This obviously was followed by a US offer to evacuate him, but he's decided to stay on in Ukraine. Tell us more about how all this is being perceived.
It's not just he decided to stay in Ukraine. He decided to stay in the capital, and with this he just made example for many our citizens, Ukrainians, and now I would say that he is playing a crucial role as a leader who motivates people a lot, first of all, and he's very tough in his last statements. I'm sure that, of course, many people, maybe like 3 months ago, 6 months ago, would expect that if something like this happens in Ukraine, it would be hard for him to cope with this. But I think on this stage, he is really good, and he's playing crucial role. But first of all, I need to highlight that what is our army doing, our soldiers.
Right.
Like people, they admire them. They are real heroes. We have each day something like miracles, what they're doing, like 3-5 people going against Russian troops, like 100 people, and they fight, and sometimes even they win. So, it is absolutely the feeling of glory And now this moral assurance of Ukrainian people that we are going to win and we will kick out Putin and his dogs from Ukraine. I'm sure that many people think like this. And of course, our soldiers, our president, our head of military forces, all these people, they're admiring whole country to fight.
And on that note, it's time now to wrap up this discussion. Fred and Olena, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all your insights on this special broadcast. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.